This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
Oh, yes, it is the Subway to Shea podcast. Anthony Rivera here with you, talking about all the news and happenings surrounding that team from Queens, the New York Mets. It's episode 154, live from the Subway to Shea studios in my office. First off, we are live on YouTube, so make sure you like the video. Make sure you're subscribing to the Subway to Shea YouTube channel. And on top of that, we are finally back on Twitter. So if you're watching on Twitter, everything's back on. I had to do the whole subscription thing just to get that on there. So we are back on Twitter. Very excited about that. And we have a lot going on today. Make sure you follow Subway to Shea podcast on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. You can follow me, Anthony Rivera, on X at AntRivera86. And like I said, subscribe on YouTube. And if you're listening on audio, you can listen on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So there's a lot to talk about. Shout out to everyone that's come in here so far. Hello to Maureen in the chat. Hello to Carlos Ramos in the chat. And look, we have wrapped up the trade deadline. The Mets made some moves. So I thought I'd bring on a good friend of mine, Andrew Tredinnick, the New York Mets columnist for the Bergen Record, northofjersey.com, and you can follow him at Andrew_Tred. Andrew, I know it's been a busy couple of days for you. Are you getting some rest, my friend?
Yeah, finally got to sit on the couch here, turn the TV on. Yeah, take a step back. It's been a wild few days, obviously. We had the Subway Series last week, 7 games at City, and now we finally get an off day. So, it's been busy, and the trade deadline in there as well. So
yeah, there's been like no day off. This is the first day off tomorrow that the Mets are getting. And then it just gets even harder because they got that road trip that's coming around with a game in St. Louis they have to make up, and they're going back and forth. So this is a true test for the Mets. They've passed the first one to me, which was the, coming out of the gate at the All-Star break. They split 2 in the 4-game series with the Marlins. They swept the Yankees in the Bronx, and then they split a series with the Atlanta Braves heading into this trade deadline. And, I didn't expect the Mets to do any major type of move unless there was the opportunity to have control, especially when it comes to a pitcher. Like if it was, Tariq Skubal, I think I would be giving up a couple of high-priced, prospects. But the Mets weren't going in that direction. I feel like David Stearns was pretty clear on the vision of what he wanted to do at the trade deadline. And for me, the big thing was for the Mets to do 3 things. One was get DJ Stewart off the roster, then Jake Diekman, and Adam Ottavino. 2 out of the 3 are gone. I am assuming because, obviously we'll get into this bullpen that the Mets have, and there's going to be some returns here, that Adam Ottavino may be on borrowed time. I want to get into the trades that were made here. And let's start off with I guess it's the biggest trade that the Mets made on Tuesday. That was the Paul Blackburn trade, getting him from the Oakland A's for Cade Morris, who was the number 25 prospect. Only made 9 starts this season because he was on the 60-day IL with that stress reaction in his right foot. He returned on Friday, pitched, he had 5 hits. He gave up 4 earned runs, 1 walk. So far this season, he's 4-2 with a 4.41 ERA. In 51 innings pitched, and he's got 38 strikeouts there. And, he will probably slot in as that, 5th starter at the end of the rotation. He's going to get his start on Friday. What are your thoughts on this move to bring in Paul Blackburn and what he represents for this rotation moving forward?
yeah, obviously, I think it's obvious what the whole dynamic changed last Friday when Kodai Senga, obviously after 5, kind of sterling innings, off the mound, suffers that calf strain. And I think, I'm sure David Stearns was, looking at that as the top end guy, the ace of the staff, a guy that you can slot in above Luis Severino, Sean Manaea. And then everything changes on Friday when that injury goes down. Obviously, it appears that he will be out for the rest of the regular season. We'll see about the playoffs. So then you go back to trying to make up some of that depth, and you look at Paul Blackburn, a veteran, a guy that was an all-star 2 years ago. Obviously not that top end starter. And David Stearns obviously was clear, when we spoke with him yesterday, that it was going to take, something extraordinary to pry away one of those prospects. But you look at a guy that's, will kind of firm up the rotation a little bit, perhaps more dependable than a guy like Tyler McGill, who pitched out of the bullpen today. I think you're looking to just extend the rotation, kind of fortify it a little bit with the absence of Kodai Senga. Obviously, then we go into the playoffs if they make it, and we'll see kind of what the top end of the rotation, how that settles. But for now, it's a matter of making it to the playoffs and trying to get some quality starts. And you look at it, Blackburn as a veteran that can hopefully kind of fortify that for the Mets.
You look at this rotation right now, and we saw what's happened to Sevy today. That's kind of been the tale of almost this entire rotation. It's, you have a couple of good starts, you have one really bad start. So, at the beginning, like when I was thinking about like how I would set up a playoff rotation. Now, obviously the Mets are in such a bind right now, trying to get into the playoffs. I always thought, maybe Sevy's the guy that leads the charge with Quintana and Manaea, but like I feel like probably whoever's hot at the time is probably going to get those starts.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to argue that. I mean, you look at Sevy, a guy with some big game experience with the Yankees. Obviously, you would think that he would be the guy that leads that rotation. But then you go after today's start, kind of a shaky one, and you're kind of wondering what the next few starts hold for him. Obviously, it's a veteran staff. Sean Manaea, Jose Quintana have all kind of pitched, in the playoffs. So you maybe look at those guys as guys you can kind of lean on, but you make a good argument, with the hot hand. It didn't seem like Quintana had a rough stretch, and now he's, kind of seemed to figure it out, was throwing the curveball close to 50% of the time this past weekend. Manaea looked awesome yesterday with 11 strikeouts. So yeah, I mean, the hot hand, and then you have some guys behind, Budo. We'll see what he kind of comes to become in these last few months. Maybe get him back in the rotation. We'll see. So yeah, but you do make a good argument. I think, but those top three kind of might lead the charge, I guess, until something happens, and then maybe you get Kodai Senga back. Who knows? And then he would be that guy that you can kind of lean on. But we'll see after 2 months down what that kind of looks like.
Yeah, fingers crossed, knock on wood, everything. Because the way we lost Kodai Senga for the rest of the season, I mean, a lot of people would say only this could happen to the Mets. But, we've been through stuff like this before in the past. So it sucks to lose Kodai Senga, especially, it wasn't like he was coming back from his start and it was, a lackluster start, giving up 4 runs, he pitched really well on Friday against a, pretty good Atlanta Braves offense. So, it stinks to lose him. But I think the silver lining in all of that is, the Mets have played most of this season without Kodai Senga and have been able to play well, have been able to turn around their season. There's just so many factors in this team. And I think they are strong enough to get through this stretch run, especially trying to get through, what is a tough gauntlet when they go on the West Coast here. Now, I want to get into another trade, the Huascar Brazoban trade, getting him from Miami for Wilfredo Lara, who was the number 35 draft pick, 1-2 with a 2.84 ERA, and he's got 36 strikeouts in 31 2/3 innings pitch. I feel like he could possibly be that, connection to Edwin Diaz, something that has kind of lacked for this team all season. You would have expected someone like Adam Ottavino to do that, even Brooks Raley before he got injured, and Drew Smith, a lot of injuries, Reed Garrett. I mean, the list goes on. But Brazoban could probably be that guy, that bridge gap to get you to Edwin Diaz in the ninth.
Yeah, I think you look at all their bullpen moves at this deadline. You know, Phil Maton, Ryan Stanek. I think he could be one of those connecting
Yeah.
pieces, and Brazoban. Those three. You know, Stearns did a really good job fortifying this bullpen, in my opinion. Because you look 2 weeks ago, it was the weak link, and now maybe you look at the starting rotation as the weak link when you add these pieces in. So yeah, Brazoban, I mean, he touched 99 today, and that's really encouraging. Another thing that Mendoza said was his changeup looked really good. You know, you look at him as a guy that can also throw multiple innings. So one thing that Mendoza mentioned today was just kind of the flexibility that he has now with his bullpen. Reed Garrett, you know, threw today, and those signs were encouraging. He was touching 97. So you know, obviously that the bullpen looking like the weak link 2 weeks ago, but I think David Stearns kind of totally changed the complexion, brought in some veterans. You look at Reed Garrett, a guy that was kind of, you know, AAA, Daniel Nunez. Some of those guys were filling high leverage roles, positions they weren't accustomed to. You bring in Ryan Stanek, Phil Maton, guys that are comfortable in the big moment, guys that have pitched in the playoffs. And, you know, it's a whole different dynamic now. And obviously Brazoban last year with the Marlins as well. So these are guys that are kind of built for this moment, not rattled by the big game. So I really like what David Stearns did with the bullpen, both before and on deadline day.
Sorry about that. Obviously, these were the two big moves on deadline day. Which move did you think was the better one that the Mets did? Was it the Brazoban or was it Blackburn?
It's a good question. You know, I wish they would have done maybe a little bit more with the rotation, like we mentioned with the playoff element of it. I don't think it's definitely not a bad move to fortify and add some depth. I think it will help them get to the playoffs. But you're concerned about when they do get to the playoffs, what that top end of the rotation goes, how that goes. So I guess I would say the Brazoban kind of adding another arm, maybe a little bit more optimistic about that. Just where the direction he took the bullpen, I like a lot of those pieces that he got.
All we heard about during this trade deadline, you know, you heard the Scoobles, which was not really, I don't think he was really going to be moved, but obviously the name was out there. But Flaherty was out there. You could talk about some of the guys in Toronto that were available. None of these names, and this is a trend that goes on with this organization, none of the names that you've heard were the moves that the Mets made. They kind of are very good at keeping everything close to the vest. And I like what Daniel Caps says on here. You know, he's liking Stearns already, and it's only been a half of a season of what we've gotten to see from him. You know, everything is it's always telling to me, not in the off season, but once you get to the trade deadline and how you handle the trade deadline, what a GM is really made of. And I kind of was disappointed, obviously, with Epler in 2022, somewhat bounced back in being able to get assets when it came to the farm system in 2023. And I know that there was not a big move here that was made by David Stearns, but you have to be happy just that he was able to improve without being able to get, let go of some of the top prospects at this moment in time.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at what the market bore. You know, Jack Flaherty, a guy that the Yankees backed out on because of his medicals. So obviously, I think he had 2 injections in his back in the last few weeks. Are you willing to give up the top end of your prospect pool for that? You look at the reliever, Tanner Scott,
Yeah.
they gave up 3 of their top 5 prospects, the Padres, to bring him over. You look, you know, obviously with Stearns, the biggest name he gave up was Tyler Stewart, was the 17th ranked prospect according to MLB Pipeline. Nothing beyond that, with some maybe smaller moves, not as flashy moves, but the team improved in every single way that you could have hoped for. You know, corner outfield, you add a starter, and you know, load up the bullpen and let Mendoza kind of pick and choose the hot hand to try and get you through to October.
When it comes to this trade deadline here, I really feel like the Astros kind of screwed up the market with the trade for Kikuchi when it came to starting pitchers. Once Kikuchi moved and they gave up all that capital, I feel like that set the market in tone. And it did come back down to earth once Flaherty got moved, but that was almost a last minute move. Like, if you're going to get rid of him, you figure out and take whatever you can get at that point in time. But Kikuchi really thawed the starting pitchers market, and you can even include the Tanner Scott trade in there as well, because the Padres, they don't care. They're just going to get rid of whoever is in their prospect pool just to try to win this year. But I really feel like the Astros were the ones that set the tone for what was to happen for the rest of the trade deadline.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious what you would think. I mean, is a guy like, you say, Kikuchi, who kind of profiles as the kind of number 3 starter, worth it when obviously David Stearns' vision since he got here has been to compete for the playoffs, but kind of build a sustainable winner, leveraging some of your outfield prospects. Your pitching has Brandon Sproat, guys like that. You can pencil them in maybe for 2025. Are you willing to blow that up for a guy like, you say, Kikuchi, whose profiles as maybe your 3rd best starter, for just kind of a roll of the dice come playoff time?
That's a good point leading into this comment by Jose Lopez Moya. The Mets needed to get a frontline starter to fill the void left by Senga due to his injury. They needed a starter that can stop the bleeding, a la Tom Seaver and Doc Gooden did. There was really no starters, though, out there like that, unless you were going to give up. You probably have to give up 2 or 3 of your top 5 to get a Skubal in here. And outside of that, what I wanted was control. If I'm giving up, top prospects, it's not for a rental, for a chance. I don't even know. Like, I know a lot of Met fans were upset that they didn't come away with the top end starter, but a lot of people didn't think the Mets weren't even going to make it out of round 1 or round 2. I mean, a starter only can change so much out of that. Like, the rest of the team still has to play well. I mean, obviously they could be a stopper, but I don't know. Even looking at what Jose de Jesus is saying about Trevor Rogers' return was also absurd. He hasn't been a consistent pitcher since 2021, and they got Norby and Stowers for him. The Marlins were one of the biggest winners. I don't know, did they get I think they got about 14 prospects, I think it was?
Yes, something insane.
Wow, man. They really always seem to figure out a way to do this, but by trading Trevor Rogers, Tanner Scott, I think Brian De La Cruz was another one. He went to Pittsburgh.
The Pirates, yep.
They really loaded up there. I don't know. If I'm not getting something that's going to not only improve this team for this year, but also next year and maybe a couple years later, I don't think I'm interested in getting rid of my top prospects. Like, I'm not giving up a top 5 for Jack Flaherty. I'm just not.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it right on the head, obviously. And you look at in the coming years, obviously, Stearns brings in these expiring contracts, brings in guys like Bader, in the outfield, Tyrone Taylor. You're going to need some of those guys, to kind of fill in the gaps moving forward. And obviously, some of them have been injured, so you haven't had quite an opportunity to kind of give them a look. But there's going to be holes to fill next year if you add an expiring deal. So, I kind of like how he did it, going and getting that kind of that stopgap in the rotation, and then kind of see what it bears, and kind of building from within. And big free agency class coming up, can add a starter there when the price isn't as high, and leveraging essentially your entire future that you acquired last year at the deadline. So giving it some time to kind of sort itself out.
Not only is Blackburn a stopgap to put at the end of the rotation, but he does have control into next year. So that's another thing that we just mentioned about having control. So at the very least, if you're looking into next year's rotation, you got Senga there, all depending on what Manaea decides to do, if he decides to take the player option or not. He could probably stay. You're looking at Blackburn, and I would hope that at some point, and we'll get into this more later, that a guy like Jose Butto finally gets his opportunity to solidify a starting rotation. But the Mets did add another reliever, and I want to get your thoughts on this guy because I don't really know too much about him. Tyler Zuber from Tampa Bay. He is 3-0 with a 2.49 ERA in AAA Durham, 29 strikeouts in 21 and 2/3 innings pitched, and they got him for the number 30, what I think is the number 34 prospect in Paul Gervais. What are your thoughts on Zuber, and when can we possibly see him come up?
It's a guy that, to be honest, when you heard that he got traded to the Mets, did not know a whole lot about. But it was a guy that David Stearns pointed out, a guy that's kind of refined his arsenal. He's shown that he's got a little bit more movement on his pitches. I think it's probably a guy that the Mets hope they can kind of get into the pitching lab, which they've been, boasting about, over the last 2 years. Kind of refine the arsenal, and kind of see what they can squeeze out of him. He is a guy that I think he's pitched a few times in the majors this season. I don't know if I'd expect that down the stretch here, but a guy that they're hoping developmentally that they can kind of get their hands on and can kind of squeeze some potential out of him in the future.
Carlos Ramos says here, Stearns has proven there's a plan and it's being executed. There's a vision. It's the first time in decades that we can say this about the Mets, and I'm loving all of it. LGM, let's go Mets. I got to agree with Carlos. I mean, David Stearns, and you're in there with all the media, and you get to hear him talk and ask him questions. Out of all of the GMs that I've seen come through here, I feel like he has been the most honest so far and has followed through on each and every plan that he has. And not only that, the fact that he does not hesitate to pull the trigger when a player is not living up to the expectations of their contract. Joey Wendell, Diekman, I mean, the list goes on with all the people. Zach Short, all of these guys that he has, and I think there was like either 12 to 14 turnover on this roster so far. David Stearns has played this game so differently that you just feel comfortable with him, in charge.
Yeah, you look at Hauser, this past week. Yeah, I think, that has to resonate with players that if you're playing to your level, you're safe, but if you're not, you might be out the door. So, he's, look at a guy like Jose Iglesias, who was in AAA, started to tear it up. He calls him up. Brett Beatty was suffering. And it's a guy that's totally energized the clubhouse, has, put his fingerprints all over this, brings a versatile, element, can play third, second base, and he's continued to swing a hot bat here in the majors. So I think, he's been super transparent, accountable, and one thing that he's mentioned is he's pushing the guys down below. Obviously, Christian Scott, I'm not sure if we had anticipated him getting a call up as quickly as he did earlier this year. They're going to push the guys down below too, to see what they're made of as well. So, I love the transparency. I love the accountability. And that's going to serve this team well, down the stretch here.
You mentioned Phil Maton, Ryan Stanek earlier with some of the moves that the Mets made, that even before the trade deadline leading into the week. But one trade we didn't mention was the Jesse Winker move. I said that the Mets needed to figure out a way to kind of move on from DJ Stewart because he just wasn't producing at the rate we needed from him. And they bring in a guy like Jesse Winker. I know there was talks about maybe bringing back Michael Conforto, which was a move that I wasn't, too excited about. But I feel like Jesse Winker here kind of fits that platoon role that you need from him, because obviously we probably will see at some point, I hope, we will see Starling Marte again. But then you look at if Starling Marte returns, you got him, Nimmo, Bader, Tyrone Taylor, Winker, and you really have a serious depth there when it comes to the outfield.
Yeah, I think it'll give Mendoza certainly the chance to mix and match, give guys time. I mean, you look at Brendan Nimmo; he's taken his lumps these past few days. Gives him an opportunity, and without skipping, without the level dropping too much. You look at Winker. I think he's batting definitely over 800 OPS against right-handers. Tyrone Taylor plays amazing defense. Dropped a home run yesterday. He's shown flashes where he gets hot at opportune times, but you don't really know what you're going to get from Starling Marte. That's the big question mark. And you bring in Winker, and you know what you're going to get. And we'll see moving forward where Starling Marte is with his health, with his knee. A guy that was hurt last year. I think he only played about 80 games. So now, Mendoza has a number of guys he can turn to in the outfield, depending on the matchup as well, and can kind of plug and place the hot hands if a guy needs a break. I love the depth that this team has in the outfield, adding Winker.
Is there any concern with Jesse because they have been taking him out early, or is that just getting his feet wet again because he hasn't been playing the outfield as much once he got towards the end of his Washington run?
Yeah, I think it's specifically right field. He hasn't played. I don't think he's played right field at all this year. He's mainly played in left. So getting him comfortable over there and right, and then you have a guy in Tyrone Taylor, obviously who's that strong glove. So I think it's just him getting comfortable. I was kind of surprised to not see him in the lineup today, but I'm sure just getting him acclimated, both in right field, with the Mets, and then go from there. So yeah, I think just mainly getting him acclimated back in right field and comfortable.
With all that has gone on with this team, with this roster, with injuries, I think Carlos Mendoza has been able to work everyone through the lineup and keep everyone as fresh as possible, because they have gone through a lot of injuries this season, but Carlos Mendoza has really been able to just keep this team on its heels and keep them marching on to the fact that they finally are over 500. They're in a spot that they can possibly take a wild card at this moment in time. So it's great to see how Carlos Mendoza has been able to handle what he has been given when it comes to this roster and dealing with these injuries as well.
I think it's also a testament to David Stearns just making moves on the periphery that weren't the splashiest moves when he made them. But now you look at a guy like Tyrone Taylor, who they traded for, and it looked like when that trade was made, I'm like, okay, it's Adrian Hauser. That's the reason they make this deal to bring in the 5 spot. Now you look at the team, maybe Tyrone Taylor was the reason that he made that deal. Obviously fortifying the outfield, the smaller moves, Jose Iglesias now, making his mark. So, yeah, I mean, they have Luis Torrens, another guy that, you look at the catching situation early in the season, it's kind of a black hole offensively when Alvarez went down. And now I think you could look at Luis Torrens as a guy that obviously is not to the level of Alvarez, but it's not that big of a drop off when he goes off, and Mendoza isn't afraid to plug him in. Like this past 2 days when Alvarez was dealing with the shoulder, you're not as concerned with Luis Torrens behind the plate. So obviously it's a great kind of tandem there with Mendoza not afraid to sit a guy down like Jeff McNeil when he was slumping, but also to have those pieces behind a guy like Jeff McNeil where plug in Jose Iglesias and the team doesn't really waver that much. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. You like what you've seen from the leadership with the accountability and the variability that Stearns has provided.
Josue says Winker's actually really good against right-handed pitchers, so I think that was a good trade. Daniel Cap saying best $100,000 catcher in the league. Thank you, Spankies. And Carlos Ramos saying great point, Andrew. You can say that about Bader and Severino as well. Fans criticize both these signings. We weren't expecting them to perform this well. Those are moves, low risk, high reward type of moves. Now, I want to just shout out everyone in the chat. Thank you for joining this show. Thank you for being a part of this. Make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you're checking out Andrew on Twitter at Andrew_Tred. And make sure you check out all his articles that he has posted for the Bergen Record and NorthJersey.com. I will have that link in the description of this video. And one of the articles you wrote was about the grades. You gave each player that got traded to the Mets a grade. Now I'm going to let everyone read that, but as an entirety, as a whole, this trade deadline for the Mets, and I also want to get from the chat, let me know what grade you give the Mets for this trade deadline, and Andrew, let me know what you think as a whole. This team, what grade would you give them?
Let's go with I'll give it a solid B. The biggest thing, like I mentioned earlier, was starting pitching, not fortifying for the playoffs, but you're not guaranteed the playoffs, so you need to get there first. I really like what they did with the bullpen. Bringing in guys with experience, guys that are different. You look at Phil Maton; he's a guy that kind of spins the ball horizontally. Tredinnick is a guy that's going to overpower you and moves the ball vertically. And then a guy like Huascar Brazoban, who's off-speed guy. He's a hard thrower as well. I really like what they did with the bullpen. And then Winker that's kind of a bonus prize. I didn't really expect that. Like, you looked at what the lineup was producing. I didn't expect them to really go out and fortify or add to the lineup because it had been performing so well. But they got a lot stronger by bringing in that lefty bat with Winker. So I'll give it a solid B. The one thing being the starting rotation. But as we touched on, the price of those higher end arms, what was out there. I don't think you say Kikuchi's going to make a world of difference. You bring in him for that cost. So yeah, I'll give them a solid B. I think all three elements they got better at. Just not quite as splashy as maybe the fans would have wanted, but I don't think it was really necessary.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I have them at a B as well, and it's also because of what is said right here, because of the state of the market. I mean, the Mets handled it as best as they could. Yes, do I wish that they got a top line starter? 100%. 100% I wanted a top line starter. And, this grade, giving them a B right now, imagine if the team still had Senga and, still went for Paul Blackburn and still made these moves. It might be a little bit higher because you have Senga still in the rotation. So, giving them a B, I think that's fair as possible for this team. And I want to move into this outlook right now for the rotation and the bullpen. You look at the rotation right now, consisting of Luis Severino, Jose Quintana, Sean Manaea, David Peterson, and now Paul Blackburn. And off to the side right now, I have Tyler McGill because there's, a little hesitancy in taking him out of the rotation. I heard from Carlos Mendoza during his press conference. But we've also seen him in the bullpen in the third game against the Minnesota Twins here. Are you for a 6-man rotation, or do you think they should keep it 5 because, maybe it might mess with, the flow? Some pitchers need to go every 5th day. I remember Max Scherzer, he needed to go every 5th day to feel comfortable. Or is the 6-man rotation inevitable?
I could see it. I could feel like you could make an argument for both. You look with the 6-man rotation, obviously it's a veteran unit. You have Luis Severino, who's been hurt over the last few years. Jose Quintana was hurt for the first time last year. Sean Manaea wasn't a starter for the whole year last year. So as the season wears on, how are these guys going to hold up? Would adding an extra guy in there kind of help them stay fresh down the stretch? I think the argument for sticking with a 5-man rotation is, do you necessarily have the arms, the long relief arms in the bullpen to sustain that? I guess with you have Jose Butto, But beyond that, do you have the guys that can kind of make up if that six man, is kind of struggling a little bit? You guy gets, hit around for a short start like today. That totally taxes the bullpen with you if you have a six-man rotation. So yeah, I mean the rosters do expand coming up, a month from now. So I can see it both ways. Whether you want to do a six-man or a five-man. I think top end, you're maybe more strong with five. McGill hasn't necessarily been the strongest to plug in there as a six, and Budo's been so good in the bullpen too. So it'll be interesting to see. I think you could argue it both ways, and that's something that they're still trying to sort through. I was very curious with McGill today throwing, I think, 34 pitches, kind of where that leaves him moving forward. So it'll be certainly interesting to see where they go from here.
And you also look at a guy like Jose Buto, who in game 1 through 3 innings, and when I saw that, I was like, man, why are they wasting him in this 15-2 type game? And then when the press conference came and Mendy was saying they were trying to keep him, him stretched out, and so I had thought that at the time, maybe if they were unable to get a trade for a guy at in the rotation like Paul Blackburn, that it would have been Jose Buto who would be in this rotation right now. But I want to get to a few more of these comments. Carlos Ortiz gave this a B as well and Jose Lopez Moya, not as happy, gave it a C plus, considering, everything that has gone down. But a couple of comments here. Daniel Cap says, when you look at this rotation, when the season started, did anyone think the Mets would be in a wild card contention? When you look at the names, like a Sevi, looking for a bounce back, Manaya, you've seen the success of these pitchers in the past. I thought they would be able to keep themselves in contention to this point. I never thought that they would go 11 games under 500 or get off to the terrible start that they have. And a lot of that had to do with, the core of this team. They were just not playing up to expectations. And they figured it out. They turned it around. They made a couple of moves, especially in the lineup, switching Lindor and Nimmo, and JD Martinez getting hot, and the emergence of Mark Vientos, Francisco Alvarez coming back from injury. And they've really turned it around. So it's great to see, with what we have, that this team is able to stay in this contention. And I hope it can continue all the way through September into October as well. So you look at that. Daniel Caps also asks, and this is where we're going to get into the bullpen, because, you look at the bullpen for the Mets, Edwin Diaz, Ryan Stanek, Phil Maton, at the moment, Adam Ottavino, you got Danny Young, you got Alex Young, you got Brazoban, and off to the corner, I have Jose Buto, because he is your long man at this moment in time. And then I also considered the guys on the injured list, Sean Reed-Foley, Reed Garrett, as well as Dedeno Nunez. I know Dedeno Nunez is going to be a lock to come back to the bullpen when he's healthy. And I figure the same thing will go with Sean Reed-Foley and Reed Garrett, because they've earned it. Where do you move, guys? This is where I feel like an Adam Ottavino might be going, and one of the lefties. But after that, I just don't know what happens here.
Yeah, it's going to be super interesting. And the one thing that, maybe they didn't address was getting a lefty. And that's something that you look at now. Obviously, Danny Young, Alex Young are those left-handers. So that's an area that, I don't know if it's a concern per se, it might be. But that's your left-handers right now, is guys that don't have as much major league experience. You look at optionable assets, Brazoban has 3, Young has 1, Danny Young has 1, Alex Young has 1, Reed Garrett, Daniel Nunez, they're all optionable pieces. So, if you can kind of mix and match with those guys, and depending on health, performance, we'll see how they fill in with those guys. But I think you have your veteran core now, and then from there, your middle relief, we'll see what happens and kind of the direction they go with some of those lesser known names or the guys with not as much experience.
The good thing about Sean Reed Foley and Garrett and Nunez is they also can pitch multiple innings if need be when they come back to the team. So, you got Budo as your long man for now. You got McGill in that kind of semi-long man also start. Those two guys are the outliers. But you look at the rest of the guys, Stanek, Maitan, and Diaz. Even Diaz, he the other night getting a 4-out save. So the fact that the Mets right now are this versatile in the bullpen could only lead, I think, to good things down the stretch if they pitch to the ability that we know they can.
Absolutely. I mean, Diaz has been a lot better recently, since he came off the injured list. And then obviously, like you mentioned, with the accountability, if a guy like Sean Reed Foley comes back and doesn't perform, he's a guy that doesn't have options. I think you can definitely, plug the rotation with the strongest assets and go from there. It's definitely a lot more depth right now than it was 2 weeks ago when you weren't necessarily sure. From day to day, there was different guys coming into the clubhouse, it seemed, every day. So there's definitely, some strong arms in there that I think you can count on for later innings, bridging the gap to Diaz, who's looked a lot better of late. Velocity's back. The slider looked nasty, a few days ago. So yeah, the pieces are there to, kind of fortify this right here.
The Mets kind of finished their homestand here 4-3 with a winning record, finished 2-1 versus Minnesota. And you look at the games here, game one, 15-2. Quintana had a great game. We talked about it earlier. 6 innings pitched, 5 hits, 1 earned run, 1 walk, 5 strikeouts. Jose Buto, 3 innings pitched for the save, 4 hits, 1 earned run, 1 walk, 2 strikeouts. Pete Alonso hit a home run, his 22nd of the season. Game 2, they won 2-0. Probably the best pitching performance of the season for Sean Manaea. Definitely his best Met pitching performance. 7 innings pitched, 2 hits, no earned runs, 1 walk, and 11 strikeouts. I think that was a season high for him as well. Diaz came in for the 4-out saves. Mark Vientos not only hit a home run in that game for number 15, but he hit number 16 in game 3. Mets lost that one 8-3. Sevy pitched only 3 innings, 6 hits, 6 earned runs, 2 walks, and 2 strikeouts. I think the first inning for him, he only had thrown 10 pitches, and then he just fell apart in the second inning. I couldn't get an out, gave up 5 runs, and that was pretty much it for Sevy. We'll get into his situation shortly. Tyler McGill came in, 2 innings pitched, 3 hits, 1 earned run, 1 walk, and 2 strikeouts. When it comes to Sevy, and it was, let me see who made the comment, Daniel Capps. What worries him about Sevy is he hasn't pitched this amount of innings since 2018. Now, there was a talk about a lowered velocity when it came to his pitches today. Should we be concerned about Severino? I know he says he feels fine, but, consider the innings that he hasn't pitched as many. Is this an issue that we have to be concerned about, especially when we're on a hunt for the playoffs?
I think it's something that you need to maybe keep in the back of your mind going into next start. And then if it happens again, then I think it's, maybe a concern. I was looking on StatCast, when some of the reporters had mentioned that the velocity was down. 93 miles per hour was his lowest pitch. It's not great, but it's not, necessarily the alarm bells go off where maybe it's 90 miles per hour. So moving forward, I think keep it in the back of your head as we go into this road trip, and see where he stands in the next time out on the West Coast.
The Mets offense was, so hot for a while, carrying this team, got the whole turnaround going. And, you look at the top of the lineup now, at some point, these guys were going to either get into a slump, come back down to earth. Lindor was playing at an MVP rate. Him and Nimmo coming into the All-Star break were the 2 hottest batters on the team and pretty much carrying the offense. And now, Nimmo has been in a slump ever since we came out of the All-Star break. today he fouled off the ball on his foot. Is there any concern for this injury to him? He had to come out of the game. I'm wondering if we should be worrying about Nimmo, especially, after getting hit in the foot. I remember on Saturday too, I think he hit a ball off his knee as well. So he's been taking a lot of lumps.
Both on the same leg too. he's been taking a beating in these last few days. Obviously he said after the game, X-rays were negative, so nothing, structurally wrong. I'm sure it's not going to be comfortable these next few days. But he's battled through some injuries. He was hit in the face earlier this year. Shook that one off. Fainted in his hotel room. This guy's been through a lot this year, and I think that's something that you look at with Mendoza. He's not going to be afraid to plug in some of these guys. I know you looked maybe last year. He was trying to prove that durability. I think Mendoza's like, listen, if you need to sit down, we're going to sit down. So I don't think it's necessarily a major issue. Maybe something to monitor moving forward. Maybe he gets a day. He has an off day tomorrow, maybe an off day at some point this week, just to kind of clear up those lumps. And obviously, he's been going through it since the All-Star break. I think he's batting 111, since the All-Star break. And he addressed it post-game today. Someone asked, how he feels. He was like, he put it bluntly, terrible. So I think this is a guy that's motivated. We'll see moving forward if that hampers him at all, but he's a resilient guy. You can tell from everything he's been through this year. So I wouldn't discount him, bouncing back when he heads out to the West Coast.
The good thing is that you got players on this team that are ready and willing and able to carry the offense. You look like what Daniel Capps is saying, Jeff McNeil. I mean, coming out of the All-Star break, we weren't sure if he was going to lose his starting role or not. And he's hit 4 home runs coming out of the break and has really helped this team, especially right out of the break to get going. It has really been such a turnaround, as Stanley says as well. You look at a guy helping out the team like Mark Vientos, who's been pretty much solid all season long. Francisco Alvarez has not really gotten, I guess, going power-wise, but he has provided so much on defense. Actually took that hit from Ramon Liriano at the plate. I feel like that's the reason why his shoulder had been hurting coming into this series against Minnesota, and he had to take a couple days off. But look, the offense has really been guys that carry each other when need be. And the one person that I'm kind of sitting here waiting, and I know a lot of Met fans are, is Pete Alonso. Pete Alonso knows he's not going to be traded now. The trade deadline's over. He's here to stay. And I just hope that he can figure out that next gear that we know that Pete Alonso can get to and help carry this team.
Yeah, I think obviously, not on pace for his career average at this point. Obviously you look at the home runs, the RBIs. He's a guy that they need to perform down the stretch here to make that playoff push. Because like you mentioned, some of those other guys are going to, kind of seek their level. I know Buck Showalter always said, seek your level. Some of those guys are going to kind of maybe fall off a little bit. You look at what Nimmo's going through now. We haven't seen that hot stretch from Pete necessarily that we know he's capable of, and that would be certainly quite the lift if he were to get going at some point here. Maybe to the tune of McNeil. You look at what he was able to do when Nimmo takes a step back this past this stretch. It seems like there's always a guy kind of stepping up and performing at a higher level when the team needs it. So if Pete can get going, especially in the heart of that lineup, JD Martinez, a guy that's been slumping, but he's shown at points this season he can get it fired up. Pete's kind of been, peaks and valleys. So if he can really kind of just sustain something here, it would mean a lot for their playoff chances.
Now, tell me if you agree with me here that this upcoming road trip is quite possibly, the biggest road trip that this team is going to have this season. You look at, they go to Anaheim, they go to, a makeup game in St. Louis against the Cardinals, head right after that. And that's a night game, as that's kind of a midday game, I guess, 5:15.
Yeah.
But then they go to Colorado to play the Rockies for a 3-game set. And then they finish off with the Mariners in Seattle. No days off, full through on this road trip. Is this not probably the biggest upcoming road trip for this team?
Yeah, it's huge. And you look at, the opponents, the Angels, a team that didn't sell as much as a lot of people, thought coming into this trade deadline season. But a team that's outside the playoffs, not a contender in the least. Then you go to St. Louis. That's a chance for the tiebreaker in the wild card. If I believe the Mets have won 3 out of 5. So if they lose that one, the tiebreaker goes to the next step. And then the Rockies, a team that's not, one of the worst in the National League, game at altitude. And then Seattle, a team that did go out and make some moves, brought in Randy Arozarena. They're competing for the playoffs. You want to see this team, definitely come out of there, hopefully win 2 of those series at the very least. So yeah, it's a huge, huge spot for them. Especially they're going to be battle tested, going through, leaving today in Eastern time, going to the Western time zone, going back to Central time, going to Mountain time, going back to Western time. I mean, it's quite the gauntlet as far as just travel, and we'll see how it kind of wears on them, despite the opponents not necessarily being to that echelon, those playoff teams. And, you look at the standings right now, I believe the Mets are on the outside looking in, so they need to sustain some success here over this week to come back home feeling good about themselves, over the second half of the month of August before another trip
Another trip out
looms in the final week. So, and that's going to be even huger with the Padres, the Diamondbacks, some of the other wild card teams, and then the worst team in baseball with the White Sox. So you look at this month of August, it's, a lot on the road and a lot to gain here.
Yeah, Maureen's right. MLB does definitely need to do a better job with scheduling. I don't know how they placed this one Cardinals game in between all of that movement that the Mets have going on the West Coast. I feel like they could have done that a whole lot better, but here we are. Stanley says the Rockies and Angels should be easy to beat. They should, right? But nothing has come easy for this Mets team this season. And considering all the movement that they have to do and all the travel that's taking place, I want them to sweep the Angels and the Rockies, but the Mets always have a hard time in Colorado. That is always throughout, the history of me watching this team, have seen that. I feel like they can play well against the Angels. The Cardinals, like you said, in the playoff hunt as well. They made some moves at the trade deadline to make themselves better. And then you end up with the Mariners, who made some big moves, getting Randy Arozarena in there and making some other big moves for their team to try to solidify their spot in the playoffs. So nothing's going to come easy on this road trip. Obviously, I want a winning record, but if you told me that this team was going to have a 500 road trip and get out of there, I'd be okay with that. But what do you see, looking at this schedule, what do you see is possibly the best outcome for this team?
The best outcome is probably, like you mentioned, sweeping both of those lesser opponents, and then winning with the Mariners, splitting 2-2 between the Cardinals and the Mariners, something along those lines. That would be a great trip. Come back home with a world of confidence, kind of continuing on that winning note that they had in this past homestand. I know, you looked at when they won the first 2 games against the Braves, you kind of get greedy. Obviously, they split there. You win the first 2 against the Twins. Hope for a sweep. Don't fall short there. So I think to get back on track with some consistent, maybe a winning streak at some point during this trip, I think that'd be great for their confidence coming back home.
Andrew, this has been a great episode with you, having you on here. I always like talking to you. Let everyone know what you're working on. I have the links to your articles in the description of this video. So if you want to check out his work, great stuff, great information on all the trades that took place for the Mets at the trade deadline. Make sure you check that out. And you can follow him at Andrew_Tred. But let everyone know what you're working on right now.
So tomorrow I'm taking a chance to catch my breath.
You need it.
Yeah, exactly.
You need a day off.
But beyond that, I spoke with Phil Maton and Ryan Stanek in the last few days. So I'll be having a feature on their time in Houston, kind of what they bring to the table as far as that playoff experience. So be on the lookout for that next week when they're on the road. Might do something on some of the prospects too, touching on what those guys have been up to down on the farm. So stay tuned, northjersey.com. Follow me on Twitter at Andrew_Tred, for everything I'm working on as the playoff race. It's been going for a little while here, but it's really going to heat up over the next month. So appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. And with so many teams, jumbled together, it's going to make for one heck of a run and one heck of a last 2 months of the season as we head into the, I guess the dog days of summer, August, and then into September as well. Andrew Tredinnick, New York Mets columnist for the Bergen Record and northjersey.com. You can follow the Subway to Shea podcast on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. Follow me, Anthony Rivera, at AntRivera86, and subscribe and watch on YouTube. Subscribe and listen if you prefer to listen on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Appreciate everyone tuning into the show, being so interactive with the chat. It was a lot of fun doing this. For Anthony Rivera, for Andrew Tredinnick, thank you so much for joining. And like I always like to end the show, let's go Mets.